right now. All right, so Dan Reed. Dan is not a stranger to most of y'all probably. Dan's resume is more loaded than I could even recount this time. I know we want to get to him, so I'll be pretty brief. Currently, Dan's the Regional Policy Director at Greater Washington. I hope you got your title correct. Dan's had a bunch of previous writing experience. He has his own blog, Just with the Pike, still does. Has written for Washingtonian Magazine, Greater Washington for many years. Going back, I mean, like 15 years at this point, right?
15 years.
Right, so Dan's great. We love Dan. He is here tonight to speak about Governor Moore's housing proposal for the state, called More Housing, with an E and two O's. It's a whole package that the governor's proposed to expand affordable housing options throughout the state. It's one of his major legislative initiatives this session. And Dan's going to tell us more about it because he's been advocating for it in Annapolis, putting in some miles to try and get this passed. So if you're mic'd up, without further ado, take it away, Dan.
All right. Hi, everybody. First off, congratulations to our new board. I am super excited to work with y'all in the coming years in the capacity that I can. So, all right. First off, those who don't know me, my name is Dan. I use they, them pronouns. I'm the Regional Policy Director for Greater Washington. What that means is I lead our housing and land use work mostly in Maryland, Montgomery County, PG County a little bit, and the state level. And I, as Sean mentioned, I have been spending the past, it's March now, possibly like 8 months of my life on the governor's housing package, which I must regretfully say is not actually called More Housing. I invented that, and I'm waiting for the administration to tell me to stop. All right, next slide. Do you do the right arrow? There we go. Okay, what we're going to talk about. We're going to do an extremely brief history of planning in Maryland. We're going to talk about the housing crisis. It's bad. We're going to talk about the governor's housing package, the poll that we did, which came out on Monday, which is yesterday, and also a little update on where the bill is and how you can help. Next slide. Just do a right arrow. Yeah, okay. For starters, who here is familiar with the Dillon rule? Are you familiar with the Dillon rule? Okay, so, right? Okay. So, American states come in one of two flavors generally. Maryland is called a Dillon's rule state. It means that local governments like Montgomery County only have the powers the state gives them. The flip side are what are called home rule states like Florida or New Jersey, where the individual municipalities have the power and basically they can do things unless the state tells them not to. And that is a really important place to start in understanding why the governor's doing what he had. Next slide. So for a century, Maryland, as a Dillon's rule state, has used that power to mess around with local planning at the city and county level. Many of you are familiar with the Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission, aka Park and Planning. It is a state agency that was created in the 1920s to sort of do joint planning for the early DC suburbs as they were beginning to grow. In the 70s, the state made an actual law that said the state can intervene in local planning affairs if and when it sees fit. There is some disagreement on what this means and how it should be interpreted. And then finally, in the 90s, Maryland does its biggest preemption of local control to date with smart growth, which, we know what that is. Next slide. So, as an organization, we do in fact believe the state can tell local jurisdictions what to do. And they should, if only because we have an unfortunate history of local control and zoning, given that Baltimore was the first city in the whole country to have race-based zoning in the 1910s, and it was the biggest craze for like 2 years until the Supreme Court knocked it down, thankfully. Our goal prior to the session was to have some kind of state-level zoning reform, particularly looking at single-family zoning. But sort of as Sean was alluding to in his speech, there are all these like little things that you can do that may not create as much noise, but could have huge impacts, such as focusing on public land, reducing parking requirements, which the county has just done, streamlining the permitting process because zoning can be an impediment, but so is permitting if it takes a really long time for something to get approved. And then setting targets for how many homes each county should produce to hold them accountable. These are all things that are sort of in the mix right now at the local and state level, and we can get back to that later. Next slide. Single-family zoning is a big thing people talk about all over the country. For those who aren't familiar, this is the idea that single-family zoning was invented in the early 20th century in large part to exclude people from certain communities, and most American cities and counties are zoned that way. So over the past 6 years, it's been a movement to revisit and open that up to maybe allow 2, 4, or 6 or more homes on a single lot. There are a number of communities around the country, cities and states, that have done this. Most recently, Montana last year. Several states have tried, like New York and Colorado. I believe Colorado is coming back this year, which is great. Closer to home, several cities and counties have attempted or made this happen, mostly in Virginia. Just in the past year, Arlington, Alexandria, Charlottesville, and I learned literally today, Roanoke, have all opened up single-family zoning to other types of housing. And Montgomery County might be next. I hope you are signed up for the Attainable Housing Strategies hearing next Thursday at the Planning Board, which will be the beginning of either a very fun or very unpleasant time in our county for the next several months. So, next slide. In part because of restrictive zoning, we have been underbuilding housing for decades. This is a graph showing Maryland housing starts since the 1980s, and you can see these are really big here. I assume a large number of you live in houses built in the 1980s because we built a lot of houses in the 1980s. Most of the homes I've lived in my life were built between like 1984 and 1988, including my current home, because we built a lot of houses. And then in the 90s, it kind of petered out. In the 2000s, it took a huge dive because of the Great Recession, and we've never quite recovered. One consequence of that, next slide, is that home prices have been increasing significantly in the past year, several years. Yes. Can you go back one slide? Just all housing units. Thank you for asking. That was a good question. No, this is it's a nationwide trend. That's a state chart. Housing prices have gone up a lot in the past few years, even before COVID. We are seeing double-digit house price increases all over the state. In traditionally expensive places like Montgomery County, and traditionally affordable places like Baltimore County or Frederick County, we are seeing really huge increases. There aren't nearly enough homes for people who want homes, as more people are forming households, more people are starting families, more people want to move here and live here. It is a problem, and crucially, the governor has identified it as such. Next slide. Governor Moore, I heard last summer or so, was interested in doing something about housing. And I heard this in July, and I spent the next 4 months trying to figure out what the thing was. He was saying all of the right things, right? Supply and demand are real because you don't have enough housing. Prices have gone up a lot. It is bad for the state's economy when people can't find places they can afford to live because they are either forced to move far from their jobs and families and social supports, or they have to leave the state entirely. Show of hands, who knows someone, friends or family, who has moved out of this state because it's too expensive? That's more than I thought, but it's a lot, right? For me, North Carolina, Florida, all over. So, in response to all of these things, and a really great report that Comptroller Brooke Lehman released in December, basically painting a, frankly, very unfortunate picture of the state's economy, the governor introduced his housing package. How did I find this out? I may or may not have had to wait outside the bathroom while Housing Secretary Jake Day, who I've just been on the panel with, was in there. It worked. I'm still waiting to meet him. I had met him once. Yes. 3 things in the housing package. One is called the Housing Community Development and Financing Act, or more financing, which would create a financing agency to support affordable housing production. The second is the Renters' Rights and Stabilization Act, aka more tenant protections, which raises eviction filing fees, makes it much harder to file an eviction, provides rental assistance and legal aid for tenants from the money generated from raising eviction filing fees, and also creates an Office of Tenant Rights and the Renter Bill of Rights so that tenants not only know what their rights are enumerated to them, and they have a place to go access information. Yes? We're getting there, but you beat me to it. Next slide.
Please hold questions to the end.
The third thing is what Jake just said. It is called the Housing Expansion Affordability Act. I want to make it abundantly clear the administration is very good at message control, and I do not believe they have said the word upzoning once. And that's going to be important in a little bit. What the thing says is if you are within a mile of a rail transit station anywhere in the state, mark Metro MTA, or if you are land owned by a nonprofit or faith community, or you are on a list of 10 state-owned campuses, which are things like the Glendale Asylum in Prince George's County, like very specific sites. These places, you can get a density bonus, which is to say the state is telling counties and cities to give you a density bonus. Either, if it's zoned for like apartments, you can build the building 30% bigger, or if it is zoned for single-family homes, you can do what's called middle housing, like duplexes and townhomes and stuff. But only if the development in question has 25% of the units are dedicated affordable housing, or if it's a nonprofit or state-owned property, 50%. They also do things like streamlining the permitting process, by which I mean telling cities and counties they have to streamline the permitting process. And manufactured homes are allowed in single-family zones. To be clear about this, because people are so confused in committee hearings, and it is like melting when I can't say anything aloud. Manufactured homes are what we used to call trailers or mobile homes before 1974. They refer to homes that are built in parts and assembled on site, but they have what's called a chassis underneath that likely are allowed to travel on the highway with. So that is distinction. So that is a distinction from modular homes, where it's just the homes built in parts and on site. They are not allowed in many parts of the state because of zoning, and so the bill would require them to be allowed in single-family zones. So in places where it may not pencil out to do townhomes or apartments, which is most of the state, we are now offering a much more affordable option to people who want to build a house. Next slide. So an example of what middle housing looks like. We love it. It's great. Next slide. We have exactly one amendment that we were pushing as an organization, and it is to make the affordability requirements more flexible. Why? They're very high, and the way that dedicated income restricted subsidized housing works is you have what you can charge in rent because in order so that residents with lower incomes can afford it, and you have what the thing costs to build. And regardless of what it is, it costs the same to build. And that thing, this has to come from somewhere. Sometimes it comes from rents or sales from market rate units because there are enough of them or the prices are high enough. Sometimes it comes from government subsidies. As has been alluded to this evening, the state has a lot of budget problems and cannot afford to subsidize every single affordable housing development that could get approved under this plan, which means that the bill could pass and very little could happen because it doesn't make financial sense. Ironically, we believe that by making the affordability requirements lower, it'll actually make more projects feasible to build, particularly down here where it's really expensive, and we'll actually see more dedicated affordable housing. Next slide. This was a big point of contention when we spoke to the administration, which we had several conversations with them across November and into the winter, for a couple of reasons. One, I think, as it has been explained to me, is there is a tension between the housing secretary, who was the former mayor of Salisbury, died in the wool Yimby, has done amazing things for permitting reform and producing a lot of more affordable homes there, and folks who are more skeptical of supply and demand, or may have felt that these higher percentages were either desirable because we definitely need more deeply affordable housing, or maybe more politically palatable. And so, as we were sort of gently pushing back on this with the administration and with the Department of Housing and Community Development, we asked them a thing that I ask any decision maker when we are working on a thing with them, which is, what do you need? And one of the things they thought they needed was a poll. We as an organization have done polls in the past. We've been talking about doing it for a long time. We did a poll in Montgomery County, or had a question in a poll in Montgomery County 2 years ago that asked, would you support building duplexes, townhomes, and apartments in your neighborhood? Like not somewhere else, in your neighborhood. Across every single demographic group, majorities said yes. Polls are really helpful for demonstrating that the 5 people who come to community meetings do not represent everyone. So we gave the secretary a poll. We commissioned a national polling firm. We spoke to 814 voters across the state from all political persuasions. We did this last 2 weeks. We got extra samples for the biggest jurisdictions in the state, particularly because I wanted to be able to show to delegates and senators, this is what people in your jurisdiction think, not just at the state level. And we had a couple of goals. We wanted to know how voters felt about the governor's bill, broadly, like the things in it, because no one had asked them yet. And we also wanted to understand, how do voters feel about the state telling cities and counties what to do? And also, we were hoping that they would validate the thing that we wanted. Our hypothesis, people would like it. Next slide. People did in fact like it. What they told us, things are bad. Local governments are doing a bad job. That poll I mentioned in Montgomery County gave the county executive a 22% approval rating for his handling of affordable housing. They want the state government to fix it. We tried different messages for this. The one that seemed to be the most salient for folks was that the state and local government should work together, which is nice. Most people, surprisingly, have not heard of the governor's bill, even though I gave it a catchy name. But they like what's in it, and if their legislators do not vote for things that will make housing more affordable, they will be less likely to vote for them. Next slide. These are actual charts from the poll. Yes. No, we are talking about zoning preemption. Like, it's not. Yeah, there's a whole ton of court cases about whether that's true or not, and I think the jury's out. We asked folks what their top 3 concerns are in the state. Across the board, housing appeared in the top 3, usually next to inflation or crime or taxes. And you could think of inflation as a form of housing costs, right? Because housing costs have gone up, like milk or bread or food, like bread. And you can see for different jurisdictions, they all vary a little bit. We noticed one big trend is that down here in Montgomery and Prince George's counties, people were generally way more agitated about this stuff. I wonder why. Next slide. We asked folks, do they feel like there are enough opportunities for renting or buying a home in your neighborhood in different budgets? People said no. People especially said no if they were younger. But still, majorities across all age groups. Next slide. Then we gave people a list of things in the governor's housing package, as well as some other things too, which will, for the future. And again, majorities say they like it. They really like the idea of making it easier to build more different types of homes in more styles and price ranges and more locations. This is the governor should do the thing we want them to do question. They really want it to be easier to approve affordable housing. They really want more affordable homes near rail transit. They like the idea of faith and religious communities and nonprofits people build homes on their land. They want more homes near rail transit. They were slightly less enthusiastic about explicitly saying we should open up single-family zoning to townhomes, duplexes, or manufactured homes, but still, majorities. We broke it even out by county. Next slide. And across the state, again, strong support for all of these things. Again, I noticed a big trend. Montgomery and Prince George's counties generally were more supportive of these things. Baltimore City, very supportive of these things. The Baltimore suburbs, however, Anne Arundel, Baltimore County, much less supportive of these things. Still high percentages, but in some cases less like a plurality, right? Which is the other. This became a problem. Next slide. Finally, this is the question I mentioned. Would people be more or less likely to support their elected officials if they voted against policies that would lower housing costs? Across the state, we saw most people were less likely. When you broke it out to who votes in what primary, there was a split. Democrats were more likely to say they were less likely, but a healthy number of Republicans too, as well as folks who are independents and don't vote in primaries. Next slide. The secretary was very excited about this number in particular. It's leverage, While we were doing a poll, this was the last 2 weeks of February, the House had a several-hour hearing for the bill. It was so crowded and it was very hot, I had to sit on the floor. I left my bag with a very nice gentleman while I went to go to the restroom, who I later learned was Johnny O, the Baltimore County executive who's running for Congress. This is my endorsement. He will watch your bag. The Senate had a slightly shorter hearing for the bill, but across both hearings, supporters overwhelmingly outnumbered opponents. There were, at the House hearing, which lasted like 4 hours, 3 opponents. 3. Part of this, we could say, it's kind of a bear to get to Annapolis. I say that because I've been there twice a week for the past 2 months. while also this was happening, several of us went to Texas for a conference and ate a lot of barbecue. And I got the poll results while I was there, which was very exciting. Next slide. What we are hearing, most of the opposition comes from suburban Baltimore, which the poll results imply, right? There has been some pressure for developments that are unpopular or controversial to be carved out of the bill. One of the biggest ones right now is at Lutherville Light Rail Station, which is north of Towson, where there is basically a parking lot, a big box store where they would like to put apartments, which down here is like extremely normal. And in Baltimore County, you get these signs.
Sorry, what do those signs say? Just for those
Oh, sure.
like
The sign on the left says, "Save Suburbia, no new light rail, no TOD, no apartments." And just to drive the point home, the next sign next to it says, "No apartments, no compromise." Thankfully, House leadership is not playing with this, so done. Next slide. That said, there may be some amendments. Despite the fact that this has been cooking for several months, this only went to subcommittee literally today. Then it will go to the full Environment and Transportation Committee, and if they give it a favorable report, it'll go to the House floor for a final vote later this month. The same will happen with the Analogous Committee on the Senate side. Sponsors feel confident it will pass. What might change? I mentioned some of the permitting streamlining things. Like one of them says that an affordable housing project, the local jurisdiction can't use school overcrowding or traffic congestion as an excuse not to approve the project. That got a lot of pushback for folks. I think the good faith interpretation of that is we want to make sure that kids do not have overcrowded schools, which is fair. So that may be weakened. Most importantly, though, my understanding is as of yesterday, both the House and the Senate are considering more flexible affordability requirements, which is the thing I want. Thank you for clapping. I appreciate that. Which I'm hopeful will actually make the bill more effective and produce the housing that we need. Next slide. So we've gotten some press about it, which is awesome. I wrote an op-ed with Jonathan Robinson and Ben Schneider, who was a former ACT board member with me several years ago, about the need for more flexible affordability requirements. This is blurry because it is actually blurry, because I could not get the resolution right, so I'm sorry. The one on the right is an article from the Baltimore Banner about the poll, which came out yesterday. It's great. They said what the poll says, which makes me happy. Next slide. So, I assume after hearing all this, you are really excited and want to do something about it. Here's what you can do. You can contact your delegates if they are on the Environment and Transportation Committee, which is the House Committee reviewing the bill in Montgomery County. If you live in districts 9, 15, like North Potomac and Germantown, 16, Bethesda, and 17, which is the sort of wiggly one from like Four Corners. 19, thank you. 19, which is sort of the wiggly one from like Four Corners to Kent Mill up to Leisure World. Let them know if you are these people in those districts. If on the Senate side, if your senators are Katie Fry-Hester, District 9, again, Damascus, Brian Feldman, 15, that's North Potomac and Germantown, or Cheryl Kagan and Rockville and Gaithersburg, let them know. If you don't live in those districts, actually, Chip, you're in 21 or 22 district, like state district. 20. If it's 21, which I think it is Mary Lehman, who is on Environment and Transportation, so you can email her. Please tell them you support the Housing Expansion and Affordability Act with more flexible affordability requirements. I think, one more slide? No, that's it. All right. Please, yeah. Can you go back? Lev, can you go? Oh, there we go. All right. Questions? Wait. Oh.
All right. Pass this around. You don't need to swallow it either. You can hold it.
Yeah, no problem. First, thank you, Dan, for the presentation, and thanks for the support during the election.
It is good to meet you in person.
Much appreciated. Nice to meet you in person too. One question: when you say the lowering of the affordability requirements, is that the 25% that's currently in the bill?
25 or 50%, depending on what it is.
Okay, and then I just wanted to be sure about that. The second part. With manufactured homes, does that now include like container homes. Like you see
Oh,
more tiny dwellings, but
that's a good question.
that would be a manufactured thing. I'm just saying they take less space.
Mhm.
That's an idea.
This has actually been a real problem because so manufactured homes are a legal term that refer to like what we
Yeah.
used to call trailers.
Yeah.
No one on the committees or of the speakers of the hearings could agree on what that meant. Well, I mean, like manufactured homes literally means something, but people didn't know that.
They don't have a set definition of it.
They personally didn't have a set definition. And there are even parts of the state. I learned Howard County actually doesn't allow modular housing, apparently, which is different. So that is actually a thing that will be amended to include different things, which may include things like shipping containers and tiny homes. So that's a totally reasonable question.
And then my last question for you is, are there provisions in the bill for instance, Montgomery County, when a developer or builder comes in for a permit, there's no sunset as to when they have to start production of building of, whatever they're building. It could be a townhome community, it could be whatever. So case in point, like I live in Gaithersburg, but right at 355 in Shady Grove, where they're now building the new Big King Farm building. That land has been bought for a while, and there's no impotence that's given to them in policy that says, hey, you got 2 years, you got 3 years, and you have to start construction, because that them holding on and not building the land adds on to the crisis. Whereas one thing I could say with the city, and I have my own fights with them about some of the things that go on. They do have a sunset clause, and developers know if you're going to come build in the city of Gaithersburg, you better start planning. You better start doing whatever you're going to do within that I think is a 2-year period.
Yeah, the bill doesn't say anything about that. The magic of Gaithersburg is it doesn't take on debt, which means there's a huge incentive to grow their tax base. More communities should do the same.
Yeah.
I mean,
zoning could be better.
yes.
Okay, so well, a couple things. You mentioned in there about a provision for campuses, Maryland State campuses. Notice it said 10 campuses in the entire university system of Maryland. There are about 12 or 13. Are there provisions in the bill for improving housing around the public universities within the state of Maryland, like College Park, Salisbury, Towson? Because one of the things a lot of college students complain about is that there's not enough affordable housing. There's this idea of luxury student housing.
Let me answer your question.
Strange conundrum.
No. So the bill does apply to rail transit stations, so that would cover a lot of College Park. It covers nonprofit-owned properties, so that may affect other parts of the state. The state campuses refer to 10 specific properties, so like not universities, not hospitals. They are, in many cases, like state-owned properties that are in some sort of diffuse. One, like an old armory, for example, or I mentioned the Glendale Asylum in Prince George's County, which is this huge abandoned mental health facility that has been sitting fallow for decades.
So we're talking about repurposing those campuses for more housing.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay. Just clarifying. I thought this was like areas where we would have more housing anyway. But more housing.
Yeah.
Anyway, to jump back on that, when we do talk about plans like within, in terms of like transit around college campuses and like areas like near where a lot of people need to get to, despite the fact that they're transit deserts, like the idea that the light rail in Baltimore does not really run through Towson, and that the Lutherville light rail is basically just a giant parking lot, as someone who went to Towson for undergrad. And also like ideas that like having more housing in parts of Western Maryland and in the Eastern Shore that don't really have a whole lot of affordable, or that don't really have a whole lot of housing infrastructure in place now. What is the bill's plan for addressing that?
Well, it covers all rail stations in the state, so that includes places like in the Panhandle, along the Brunswick line. And actually, there were some rural delegates in the hearing who expressed concerns they would like more of their communities covered because they also have affordable housing problems. And that's what I think the nonprofit part is geared towards, because it is across the entire state, as well as manufactured housing, right? So.
I have another zoning question. I'm an architect, so you're saying that the time to change zoning from residential to a higher density, the R60 to some other density, has been shortened? A lot easier to get, or if you have a project you want to...
What it is saying is that it is basically telling local jurisdictions to allow larger projects than the zoning currently allows. So you asked earlier about, is that same as eminent domain, right? So there's a whole body of work, court cases around the country about like whether zoning changes are a taking, right? And there are a lot of Supreme Court cases that talk about, like, for instance, design review. Are really strict design review or really strict environmental regulations, are they the same as a property taking? And in general, the answer has been yes, depending.
The city grows by changing the zoning so that it gets more dense.
Right. So no one,
So
I'm not sure there's been a ruling about going the other way, like allowing more development is the same as, the state taking a property. I think this actually would be theoretically increasing the value of the property. So take it from me, someone who got a C in planning law.
So, lowering these kind of affordable housing standards, they can be really contentious, because I've definitely heard of projects where this debate over like how much of the units should be affordable ends up kind of getting housing projects canceled, and then there's no housing at all. What's kind of like your strategy for kind of communicating with people that maybe high affordable housing like percentages may not be in everyone's best interest?
So the funny thing about that is, people, particularly like committee members, when they saw the bill in the House and Senate hearings, one thing kept coming up is they read where it said, for example, 50% affordability, 50% or affordable units for nonprofit owned properties was what it's asking for, and they interpreted this as, we are going to get a lot of affordable housing in my neighborhood. I do not want a concentration of poverty. This is like a recurring thing that people said, as if the bill was making it magically happen. So the irony is, I'm getting the thing that I want because people misunderstood in a different way, or they had concerns that are not my concerns. To his credit, and I'm talking about how the governor talks about this because it is, I think, a good example for how to talk about it, has been really, really effective at making it clear who affordable housing is for, right? The bill is targeted at families making roughly 60% of area median income, which is a typical threshold for subsidized housing. Montgomery County uses the similar for their MPDU program. And that threshold varies across the state. It can, depending on county, it can be as little as $49,000 a year. It can be as high as $82,000 for a family of four in Montgomery County. And so that, for example, is a teacher and a delivery driver, right? Or an EMT and like a custodian, right? So the governor is very effective at using those kind of examples. These are the people this is intended for, because I think, and not think, just saw, right, the like very, I think, visceral response some folks had to the term affordable housing. But it's people like me. My first home in Montgomery County was an MPDU, right? I was a 26-year-old city planner making just shy of $50,000 a year. It was for me. So I said that. Oh boy, many hands. You were in the back first, and then Tina, and I don't know your name, and then Carolyn.
Hi. Thank you for explaining this. I feel like you've done a really good job making this digestible and understandable. This might be a loaded question. It might just be like my naivete for how these processes work. But presuming these passes, how long do you anticipate it would take for like projects to really start kind of picking up, and this to maybe start having an impact on those like really dramatic jumps in housing prices that you showed?
So that's actually a really good question, and it's something I think gets lost in a lot of these conversations, because in any discussion about zoning or planning or development or something, both supporters and opponents act like it's going to happen tomorrow. And the unfortunate thing is these things take a long time. The best time to have passed this bill was 20 years ago. This is setting the stage now so that we are basically making up for lost time for decades of not building enough, and we will see. It'll take years for it to happen, right? That's the sort of news. Part two is that, especially when you have like a sunset clause for a development application like Shanika was talking about, Jake Day, who's currently the housing secretary and was formerly mayor of Salisbury, approved. He for 3 months basically streamlined permitting and got like 8,000 houses approved, which are some of which are being built. So like when there is actually demand for the housing and you make people build it, when they say they're going to, you can make things happen. But it takes a while, right? Even from start to finish, the process of like, I want to build an apartment building here, 2 people moving in the building, it's 5 years because of financing and permitting and the constructing of the thing and then leasing the building up. The third thing is though, that's why renter protections are so important, and that's why they're also in the housing package, right? Because we can't make your rent go down tomorrow. We can prevent your landlord from gouging you next year, which this does not cover rent stabilization, but it does address the issue of keeping people in stable housing in the near term. So, okay, and then Tina.
Okay, very quickly, I just wanted to put in a vote for manufactured housing. Years ago, I visited a plant in Point of Rocks, Maryland, a factory that built affordable homes. They took us on a tour, and it was quite amazing. I mean, everything was pretty much put together except for plugging it in and doing the sewer. I was trying to look it up to see if it might still be there, but I found North American building, I think it was called, in Frederick, Maryland, that does prefab homes. So maybe we have lots of opportunity in the state already to go.
Oh, absolutely. There's a development in Howard County from the 90s called New Colony Village, which is the story was really amazing. I read a blog post about it one day, but it's basically this they are manufactured housing, right? So like trailers, but they were designed as like multiple, like 2-story, like colonial style houses. And because of the zoning, because it was for manufactured, it was for basically a mobile home park, they were very close to each other. So they are, the building technique was more affordable, the land costs were closer together, and like to see interviews from the builder, he was very explicit. Like, I want to create a development where single mothers can afford to buy a house.
Yeah.
So you can go. It's off Route 1 in Elk Ridge. It's gated, so you have to ask them to go in. But it's an example of what we could do more.
Are you next?
Yeah. All right. You raised your hand in the back, and then Carolyn.
Yeah, I just want to introduce myself. I'm John McCaffrey. I'm bringing down the median age in here. I'm president of Crosswalk Student Organization, so we do like youth engagement, urbanism. I love what you guys do at Greater Washington. Obviously, I'm a part of ACT as well. 2 questions based on our slideshow this evening. You mentioned briefly about the Montgomery County zoning, something about next Thursday. Is there some way you could provide more information on that? Because I'd like to get people over to that.
we got some folks who can tell you about that.
Yeah.
The short version of it is, for the past several years, Montgomery County has been looking at opportunities to basically open up single-family zoning. The proposal that was on the table at the planning board 3 years ago would have basically, make sure I get this right, would have allowed duplexes in most of the county, triplexes in slightly fewer areas, and then near transit up to 4plexes on a single-family lot. It got put aside because the entire planning board was forced to resign, among other things. And so it is coming back this spring. There's a public hearing on Thursday, the 21st, at the planning board. Well, it's not a public hearing, it's a listening session. So they're inviting people to come and talk. There's still plenty of time to get involved with this. Over the next, say, 3 or 4 months, the planning board is going to do work sessions and review it. You'll get to see the recommendations as they evolve. Then we'll go to the council in the summer. There'll be a big public hearing, possibly several, later this year. So when we are done, I'm going to give you my card, and you can reach out. When you say student, like high school or college?
I'm a senior in high school.
Fuck yeah, where you go?
BCC.
Awesome. All right.
BCC.
Nice.
One more question though. I mean, let's be real. I mean, there was a decent amount of people who were saying not sure, and I understand that like these are pretty complex bills and they're nuanced, right?
Yeah.
But how can we kind of shift that needle towards, yeah, let's do this? I mean, there were some of those surveys saying, 14%. That's substantial, right? How can we shift that to maybe 5 or 4%? Do we have any
That's
ideas?
a good question. I'm not sure.
Okay, that's okay. That's a valid answer.
Yeah, education.
Yeah.
And sometimes what happens is you do it in an area and people see, oh, it worked in that area.
Mm-hmm.
Like some of the not sures I've seen with some of the projects I've worked on is they're not sure, and then you do it and they're like, oh, that was the best thing ever. So
Yeah. Yeah, I think what I would say is actually I'm not as worried about the not shores because most people don't care and will not get engaged. And the nice thing about surveys like this is we can actually get a broader version of opinion. I'm more, the folks who can be motivated to do a thing, which could be some not shores, right? Those are ultimately like the sort of people at players are the ones motivated to like contact legislators and stuff. The ideal, personally, is a scenario in which you don't have to have a public hearing to do so many things, so that people who are happy with things and they don't mind the not shores can continue to not mind and just have more options. Yeah. Is a scenario in which you don't have to have a public hearing to do so many things. So which one are you looking for? People who are happy with things and they don't mind the not shores can continue to not mind and just have more options. Yeah.
And I just would add that in a lot of cases, just to real quickly go back to the slide where we had the pictures of what these homes look like. A lot of these homes fit right into, especially missing middle, fit right into the existing fabric and aesthetic of the single family neighborhood. That's kind of part of their charm. So when people hear fourplex or duplex, they usually are thinking really big buildings. And if you show them pictures that, oh, these things are at most 4 stories, usually
Forgive my
3 or
cynicism, 'cause
fewer,
I used to say
and you show
literally
them that the
exactly
design of them
that.
makes it that you
That
can.
is around the corner from my house. I live in a townhouse in a neighborhood called East Silver Spring, which is over there. I have neighbors who have never been down the street. They aren't going to look at these. They don't care. And that's actually the most frustrating thing, is I could show them all the pretty examples in the world, and I could tell them all the right things. I could show them who could afford it. I could say who it's for, and you're just not going to move them. And I had to keep moving. I had to keep walking myself. I have invited so many of these people in my neighborhood association to come look at my house. Exactly one has taken me up on it. And she did say it was fine. I'm sorry, you said something. I have tried.
So 2 more questions for Dan.
Oh yeah, Carolyn had her hand up, and then I'll go to others.
Well, first of all, thank you for the ingenuity
Yeah.
behind the poll, and congratulations on the results and
Thank you.
just the reaction it's getting. Just for those of us who don't live in one of the districts represented on the your what you can do slide, do you recommend that we still reach out to some of those members,
Yeah.
or like even our delegations, and just say,
I think the next best thing is usually your delegation because people talk. I think as a county resident, it's helpful to reach out to others in your county. I mean, you will. Mike English said he emailed the entire delegation about something. He got it very smart. Like, well, you're not in my district, but he still saw the email.
yeah, right. That's okay. I think that's
Yeah.
all I had.
Thinking of one of the other slides, the Save Suburbia. Dan, would you care to comment online or offline about a group like the Montgomery County Civic Association, Civic Federation? I mean, created NIMBYism.
So I'll say this. I was late coming here because I went to go virtually to speak at the Greater Alney Civic Association, which is a civic association in Alney. I went to high school out there. I went to Blake, so I'm familiar with that area. And I laid on it real hard. How much time I'd spent in Alney, how much I loved Alney. Because the reason they had me there is to talk about another bill in the House right now that would basically invalidate exclusionary covenants that say if they're stricter than the zoning, right? If you have a covenant in your property that says you can't build apartments, but the zoning allows it, it would invalidate those. And folks in Alney are upset about this. And one gentleman even told me he was kind of triggered by some of the language I was using. Because he lived in a big house, in a big, nice subdivision with other homes and big lots, right? And I made it really clear to him, and I would say the same thing to the Civic Fed and other folks in my neighborhood, whatever, right? There's a difference between individual decisions, right? People move to a certain place because they like it, and they want it, and they like where they live, and they may want to stay the same. And that is completely valid. All of it, right? That can be held at the same time as we have systemic problems that create more segregated and exclusionary places that make it harder for people to get around, that make it harder for people to access opportunity and to be close to the things they need in their life, friends, family, faith communities, what have you, right? These two things can happen at the same time. And I hoped that gentleman felt better about it. So I'm saying that to say, I think folks can complete the two, right? Civic Fed has some well-intentioned people and some people I may have contacted lawyers about. And they are all coming from the same place. They like where they live and they want it to stay the same, which is valid. How they go about moving in the world and how they use like local processes may not always have the best impact. The other thing I'm going to say is there are people in the Civic Fed who don't feel that way. So it's changing. Things are changing. Everything is changing. Yeah. I want to give it to someone who hasn't asked a question already. All right.
I'll ask another question on affordable housing. So whenever I see these requirements, the first thing I think of, well, where's the money you're going to pony up for it? So when these come up, do we ever have conversations with the elected officials that if you're going to put in these requirements, are you going to put in the money from your budget because it's your responsibility and you're the one talking the big game about it?
That is a fantastic question, especially because it's budget season right now. Montgomery County has two funds for this purpose. One is called the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, which does exactly what you say, is when there are projects, a large share of affordable housing, that fund is designed to help to make up the difference, right, to make the project work. The council has been pretty good at funding it the past couple of years. They, like all things, need to be constantly pressured to do that. And actually, like, you know, we are more involved in budget stuff in DC than in Maryland, but if there was like one budget thing that you did, aside from saving Metro, of course, is urging council members to keep the Affordable Housing Trust Fund funded. The other fund, and this is sort of a longer term thing, is called the Housing Innovation Fund, and I think this is cool as shit. So, as I mentioned, there's this sort of like thing here where like you have to figure out how to make up the difference, and oftentimes part of the difference comes from private equity, right? Which is fine, cool, right? These are investor dudes, mostly dudes. They charge interest, and that counts against the project, right? The Housing Innovation Fund, created by Montgomery County, what it does is it replaces that. The county sells bonds to investors from another place. They do that. They then charge, they get very low interest rates, right? And they're basically creating this fund that will sustain itself over time. The money from this fund, a few $1 million at a time, goes to fund the construction loans for affordable housing developments that the county then later owns, which they can then use the proceeds from to pay off the construction loan, and the money goes back into the fund where it can be used again. This is what we used to call public housing. Now we call social housing. And they're the first development in the county, possibly one of the first in the nation, has been built. It's called the Laureate. It's at the Shady Grove Metro Station, just opened last year. It is 30% of the units are set aside for lower income households, including some as low as 50% AMI. You can rent a one-bedroom apartment in this building, which is new and has a fire pit and a swimming pool and a business center, for $13.35 a month, which is like a time machine. The building is a time machine. And they can do it because the county owns the building and provided some of the money for it as part of this revolving fund. It is so cool. I'm not conveying enough how cool it is because I can tell from your expression. But it actually, that is literally the answer of how we're going to pay for it. It's by creating this revolving thing that replenishes itself over time. Where? It's a nice building. Damn, I'm moving there.
Yeah. Well, thank you all. Let's give a round of applause for Dan. Appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So, appreciate y'all for being here. Just a couple quick announcements. If you like what you just heard, it's still time to contact your state delegates or state senators about it. So please go ahead and do that while the bill is still alive. Appreciate that. Speaking of which, next month we'll have some state delegates speaking. Not sure yet, but we're going to have one of our state delegates here do a legislative wrap-up because the end of session is right before our next meeting. It's the day before. So
Which session will be a lot longer.
oh, it's it's 90 days for a good reason. I would argue. I used to work there, so yeah, it'll be over. So we'll have a state delegate speaking next month. Yet to be determined will be one of them. Any other announcements or questions from the group? Kathy?
So next month we'll be back in this room again because of the election judge training downstairs. And in May we are a week later than our second Tuesday because that is primary voting day, the second Tuesday of May. So we're bumped to the third Tuesday of May for that month.
Lots of politics. Thank you, Kathy. Alrighty, so thanks all for coming. Yeah, please join if you like what you heard. You come up to the table here, and please take a flyer as well about the funding Metro and all that. So thank you all for being here.